The story begins with a funeral procession for the soldiers who have passed away. 2 weeks earlier, at the Incirlik Air Base, Syria, Commander Reese gathered all his team because they were going to carry out a mission to chase a man named Dr. Jahan Kahani. They began to strategize to ambush Kahani and immediately moved at night. The whole team entered a tunnel and moved very quietly. They managed to find out that there was a bomb trap that had been deliberately set to welcome their arrival. Gunshots started to sound shortly after that. The arrival of Reese and his troops was noticed, and one by one of team members started getting shot. Evidently, the enemies had been waiting for them were numerous. Reese ordered the rest of his troops to fall back immediately and contact the headquarters. However, one of the troops panicked and ran recklessly, causing a large explosion that killed the other troop. Then there is a flash where Reese is in a house with his wife and his daughter, when a crow accidentally crashes into the window of his house and kills the bird. The flash brought Reese back to his senses after being hit by the effects of the explosion. And seeing Donnie, who was also killed next to him because of the explosion, Reese managed to get out but still got shot from a very large number of enemies. At that time, only Reese and Boozer were one of the surviving troops, while the others had died in battle. Reese gave news to his wife, named Laura, that all of his members had died, leaving only him and Boozer. And then an interview was conducted with Reese with the aim of uncovering how the incident actually happened during the failed mission, where a recording was played in which the interviewer said that Reese's man named Donnie was the one who caused the explosion to occur. But Reese immediately denied this by saying it was not Donnie who caused it, but one of the PDS troops who was very panicked. The recording was made as if the fault was caused by Reese's troops. At the doctor's examination, Reese was declared in a good condition and finally allowed him to back home to meet his family. Then Reese went to a bar to drink with Boozer, where Reese met a reporter named Katie Biranek. Katie wanted to get news from Reese regarding why haven't any statements been issued regarding the deaths of 12 Navy SEALs, but Reese immediately rejected it by saying that Katie would not get any news from himself or Boozer. And it just so happened at that moment Boozer was just coming out of the bar, and after that, Reese was getting ready to back home with Boozer. A few moments later, Reese finally arrived in Coronado, California. His best friend named Ben came there to pick him up. Reese told Ben that his team had been framed by deliberately giving bad information to trap them, and someone deliberately changed all the contents of the audio recording of the incident. Reese then arrived at his house, and his arrival was immediately greeted by Lucy, who was his beloved daughter, and also his wife named Laura. Laura had also received the news that Reese had a concussion and needed a lot of rest. Reese still remembers the incident of the explosion. The next morning, while relaxing with his family, Reese gets a call from headquarters with shocking news and orders him to come immediately. Reese was very surprised. When he arrived at the incident, which was Boozer's house, Boozer was declared to have committed suicide 2 days ago. Absolutely, Reese could not accept it, because the day before, Reese was still with Boozer. While remembering the moment they came home together on the plane. At his base, Reese explained again that his team had been deliberately framed to carry out the final mission to his superior, Admiral Pillar. However, because it was stated that he had experienced brain failure and memory problems, Pillar told Reese to take a break from his work first. One of his commanders also said that Boozer killed himself using his own gun, which made Reese did not believe it and said that was impossible. When he returned to meet with Ben, Reese said that it was very impossible that Boozer would kill himself using his own weapon, which made Reese even more certain that he and his entire team had been framed. Ben advised Reese to go sailing with his family, because he really understood that Reese's condition, which was experiencing a heavy burden of suffering. To make sure is he really sick or not? Reese tried to email Katie, who met her at the bar while he was with Boozer, to ask if Reese was really alone while he was meeting Katie. And we returned to the funeral ceremony for Reese's comrades in the army. The defense minister was also present there to give a speech, and Reese took part in placing a token of appreciation for his friends at the funeral. After the funeral, the minister invites Reese to talk and informs him that Musa, the person who provided information about Kahani and Reese's failed mission, has been shot till dead and took money from the sword troops, and Reese will be the first to be notified if Kahani found later. On the way home, Reese realized that a car following him, and when he got home, Reese told Laura about the car and told his wife to take their child. Reese quietly approached the car and pointed his gun. Actually, it was Katie. Katie intended to meet Reese without anyone knowing, so Katie secretly followed Reese to his house. Then from the tracking results, Katie explained that Boozer had died exactly when they met at the bar. At that time, Reese still did not want to provide any information and immediately told Katie to leave. But before leaving, Katie had left a business card, in case if Reese could change his mind later. Reese then felt a headache while remembering his past with Boozer at the bar. and Reese started to doubt himself about things that had happened before. Then he put the gun in his private safe and told his wife that maybe something had happened to him during the surgery and Reese wanted to get medical treatment. Finally, Reese went to the clinic to examine his brain and had a kind of scan done so that the results could be known more clearly. Reese was put in a room to begin the process of scanning his brain under the supervision of a doctor from outside the room. There, Reese remembers the recording of the incident when the bomb in the tunnel exploded. After that, Reese was pulled out again, but not by the doctor, but someone dressed in black who was pointing a gun. Reese realized that it was these people who killed his friend, Boozer. With his quick reflexes, Reese confronted the gunman and a fight ensued in the room. Reese had felt pain in his head while fighting, but Reese still managed to injure the hand of one of the perpetrators and shot the other perpetrators till died. Reese realized that the gun in his hand was his own, which he had just kept in his personal safe. Then in a rush, Reese immediately returned to his house to confirm the situation. He contacted his wife, but there was no answer at all. Upon arriving home, Reese was shattered to pieces, finding his wife and his daughter had been passed away because of killed by someone. Then the scene reveals flashback when Reese was telling what happened to him recently. The officer made a sketch of the perpetrator's face based on the results of the information provided by Reese. Absolutely, Reese was very sad and devastated by the death of his wife and his daughter. That night, his friends tried to cheer him up a bit with some funny stories of their old memories. But after drinking, Reese decided to go home, because he still felt sad and decided to be alone in his house. Reese looked at a picture of his daughter while remembering the old times when they were hanging out together. Suddenly, a bird crashed into the window of his house. Suddenly, his family disappeared and Reese saw himself, or Reese realized that he had been having hallucinations. The next day, an NCIS special agent named Josh Holder came to Reese's house to handle the recent murder case of Reese's family. Josh asked to see the safe used by Reese to store the gun used by the perpetrator to kill. There, Josh said that there couldn't be anyone else who could open the safe, but Reese said that the perpetrator had a very sophisticated technique, so the killer could do this. Reese also reminded Josh again that Boozer's death was not a suicide, and Reese firmly believed in that. Then Reese went to his headquarters to go to his superior, Admiral Pillar. Reese said that he was not sure if NCIS was able to handle his case. Reese also believed that all of these events made by Kahani, who deliberately sent assassins to chase him, and also Boozer. He also reminded that the whole community is currently in a state of danger, because the killer is still on the loose. However, all of Reese's opinions were opposed by Pillar. Pillar even insulted Reese for his own reasons, which made Reese immediately very angry, and there was almost a fighting. Reese decided to leave from there. The next scene showed Katie going to meet Josh when he had just left his office. Josh then took Katie to the clinic where Reese was seeking treatment, which is now the place of the incident. Josh gave a statement that the clinic had no indications of assault and not even a body was found, which Reese said after being shot 3 times. All the forensic results also showed that all the bullets and weapons used belonged to Reese, so Josh suspected that all the incidents at the clinic did by Reese. Josh was very sure of what he said, because he was the first to arrive at the crime place. Josh also thought that Reese was experiencing a disorder, so that's why Josh checked his disease. Because of this, Katie decided to go straight to Reese's house. Katie immediately told Reese that there were no signs of an attack at the clinic. Katie also explained that there had to be something that could support Reese to prove all his words. Then Katie asked Reese to sign a power of attorney, so that Katie could take Reese's medical records to find out more information about what really happened. But, before signing, Reese asked Katie for a report about Boozer's death to investigate. And before they parted ways, Reese gave a cell phone with a special account, so Katie always could be connected to Reese safely without anyone knowing. Then Reese looked for information about who Josh Holder really was, but, at that time, Reese felt a pain in his head which started to make him hallucinate again. And at that moment, from Reese's eyes, Reese felt that Josh was one of the perpetrators of the attack. Reese wrote Josh Holder's name on the back of a picture of his daughter, which he still keeps. The next day, Reese immediately conducted reconnaissance of Josh. And after that, continued to go to Ben's house to report that he has found the killer. From the results of his investigation, Reese firmly believes that Josh is the mastermind behind all the events and is the person assigned by Kahani to hunt him and Boozer. After that, Reese disguised himself as someone else and went to Josh's apartment pretending to be a potential new tenant. While walking around, Reese learned and pay attention to all the security systems in that place, looking for a point where it would be possible for him to enter. Reese also took a picture of the shape of the door lock and immediately learned how to break the door lock. Elsewhere, Katie is visited by her coworker named Jordan while playing poker. Jordan continues to look for Katie because Jordan feels that Katie has been avoiding him lately. Jordan wants Katie to immediately finish the latest news related to Reese for immediate publication. Meanwhile, Ben immediately informed Reese that the target had just moved. Absolutely, this was Josh Holder, and Reese immediately headed to Josh's apartment which he had just left. And it didn't take long time for Reese to unlock the door of apartment. Reese found a laptop belonging to Josh which was located on a table and immediately copied all the data that he thought was important. When he finished, Reese put the laptop back on as before and left the apartment. Reese checked all the data that he just copied and did at Ben's house. But just a few moments, Reese got a call which turned out to be from the minister who wanted to invite him to meet. There, Reese reminded the minister that there was a dangerous person in NCIS who was Kahani's order and said to immediately take an action to deal with it, but the minister said that Kahani is no longer a problem for Reese. Along with the release of a current news stating that Dr. Kahani had been declared dead in an elite U.S. military operation carried out in Syria. Everyone there is happy to hear the news. And the minister hopes that Reese can rest easy knowing that the mission to hunt Kahani has been completed. In the evening, Ben comes to Reese's house to inform him that Josh has just opened Reese's biometric data from the team database. Ben also found that Josh had opened Reese's fingerprint data 2 days before the murder. This also made Ben believe that Josh was indeed the culprit. Reese still remembered the wound he made on the left hand of one of the murderers so he could find out the truth. Ben also gave Reese a special weapon to avenge his family and also Boozer. Meanwhile, in another place, Katie was seen coming to the clinic where Reese had checked his brain to retrieve the results of the test series. The nurse initially refused, but after Katie gave some money, the nurse also wanted to take the files. After that, Katie called Jordan and said that they would get some very interesting news. And then, the scene then shows Reese sneaking out alone to break into Josh's apartment in the middle of the night. While continuing to move, Reese found Josh who was fast asleep and immediately shoved the weapon into his mouth. Reese asked Josh to show his hands, but there were no scars whatsoever. Then Reese asked who Josh worked for. But at that moment, Reese began to remember his past where he was questioning a hostage. This made Reese's headache recur. Reese kept trying to keep asking Josh, but his head was getting worse. And after being increasingly forced, finally Josh said a name, namely Saul Adnan. Someone who turns out to be paying Josh to do his job. Saul was the one who gave an information and money to Josh. Josh also tried to fight back when Reese was in pain, but fortunately, Reese acted fast and shot Josh immediately. Reese immediately untied Josh and made it look like it was a suicide and immediately left the place. Then the scene shows Reese burning Josh Holder's files after killing him. Then he wrote Saul Adnan's name to be his next target. He searched for information about Saul Adnan on the internet. Then invited Katie to meet immediately. Elsewhere, the minister gathered all her members to discuss the plan to overhaul the budget request before entering into the allocation. The minister wanted a significant reduction in the duration of the Special Forces assignment. That moment coincided with Reese, who was preparing his weaponry to be used for the next mission. The Congress members seemed a bit objected because they had discussed the budget for a long time, but the minister persisted because she felt that the soldiers had been very meritorious to fight for all of them. A few moments later, Reese went to a restaurant to meet Katie, who was already waiting for him. There, Reese inquired and sought further information about Saul Adnan and Capstone Industries. Because the company has a very large asset value that exceeds the provisions, and Reese wants to know where the rest of the company's assets are. At that place, Katie gave file of the results of Reese's examination which she took from the clinic and found tumor cells in Reese's brain and mentioned that the symptom was frequent sudden headaches which Reese had been experiencing recently. Reese didn't believe that those were the results of his own test, but Katie advised him to do a biopsy in order to find out more accurate results. But shortly after, Reese saw someone suspicious coming there and immediately asked Katie to get away from that place. Reese knew that the person he had just seen was a soldier. Reese deliberately crashed his car into that person's car. And when just got out of the car, that person immediately shot Reese. Luckily, Reese managed to defeat the person first and took a map that was in it. It turned out that Reese had been made a hunting target and the contents of the map were all data about Reese. When they got there, Reese finally asked Katie to split up and hide for a while. But before leaving, Reese gave Katie a gun for just in case. Katie also asked for information about Capstone so she could find out more about that company. Elsewhere, a troop is seen practicing shooting in a building. The squad was led by Steve. After the training, Steve headed straight to his office at Capstone Industries. Steve is the leader of the company and Saul Adnan works for him. Saul informs Steve that Gordo has died. For your information, Gordo is the person Reese shot on the street. Saul is worried that Reese is still alive because Josh knows who he is. Saul didn't know that Josh had also been killed by Reese, but Steve told Saul to stay focused, because they had an agreement called Plano that they had to succeed in realizing, because Capstone had spent a lot of money on his business, and Steve needed Saul to finish it. At night, at a motel, Reese took medicine to relieve his recurring headache. At that time, Reese had another hallucination where he was at his house with his wife who was still pregnant. The condition turned bad when there was an explosion and many birds crashed into his house. Finally, made Reese wake up the next morning. Ben also came there to bring Reese food and also gave an information that NCIS had issued a warning, and the person that hunting Reese on the street was Adrian Gordonis, a former Marshak who currently works for the Lowe's Tactical, and because many people are looking for Reese at this time, Ben advises him to stay hidden, while Ben will join him in finding out about Capstone Industries. The scene moves to a golf place, where Saul Agnon meets with his business partners. The name are Elias and Mike to conclude an agreement to buy the company. Ben has also been there to carry out reconnaissance of Saul. At every opportunity, Saul kept trying to persuade Elias to want to bid for the New Bellum company led by Mike. Absolutely, Steve was the one who ordered to immediately sell the New Bellum company, but it was not known yet what the purpose of the sale was. From a distance, Ben continues to stalk Saul and inform Reese of his situation there. Meanwhile, Katie, who's been at a beachside house hiding, immediately calls Jordan to tell him that he's been wrong about Reese all along. Katie only asked permission to leave town for a moment and then immediately hung up the phone. Meanwhile, at the minister's place, one of the members asked again if the minister was really sure about her decision, because it would make their ranking go down. This man named Richard said that maybe their contractor was not will agree to the proposal given by the minister, but the minister still insists on her decision. Hearing this, Richard always goes and enters his room to call someone via his encrypted cell phone. The scene moves to Reese, who goes to a nightclub. There, his arrival is greeted by a girl named Raven. Reese tells Raven that he wants to party, but he often has headaches. Then Raven offers a car to help Reese. Reese also agreed to buy it. Reese also remembered his past, who had come to party at that place with his men. After that, Reese went back to his room to prepare all the weapons needed with Ben. Meanwhile, Saul was in a luxurious house that he used to hold a party to persuade Elias to want to make an offer to his company. Because Elias was impressed at the parties still procrastinating, Saul finally forced Elias to make a decision or get out of the deal altogether. Because of that insistence, Elias finally told Saul to tell Steve that he would inform his acquisition team and make an offer the next morning. Saul Agnon's mission was successful and he immediately broke up the party and told everyone to go home. Then Saul returned to his room and planned to rest. That's when Reese entered there quietly. While Saul was in the bathroom, suddenly heard music outside. Saul saw it, but no one was there. Reese immediately covered Saul's head with plastic, then tied his hands from behind. Not long after, Saul woke up and immediately vomited. Saul tried to ask for help, but none of his men heard his screams. Reese got straight to the point by asking why did Capstone Industries want him dead. Saul tried to avoid answering by saying that he didn't do anything, but after that, Saul finally gave a name. He is Steve Horn. Steve is the one who has all these ideas. Apart from that, Saul also said about a project called RD-4895. Saul knew absolutely nothing about the project, but what he did know was, it was worth a lot of money. Then Reese's last question was who was sent by Saul to kill his family, was in Mexico, and after that, Reese decided to inject methadone into Saul's body to make him die peacefully. On the other side, Katie is seen looking for info on Capstone in her room, and shortly after, Reese sends a message containing Project RD-4895 and tells her to be careful. After that, Reese explained to Ben about the two new names he had written on his daughter's drawing paper, namely Steve Horn, who would later explain about Project RD-4895, and Marcus would lead them to the killers of Reese's wife and his daughter. Then the scene shows Reese, who is on an adventure with his daughter in a forest. When he reached the top, Reese realized that it was all an illusion and he was walking alone to continue his mission in chasing the killers of his family. This time, Reese was stalking someone named Marcus Boykin, who was previously tipped off by Saul Agnon. Reese set up his position on a hill. From a distance, Marcus's car could be seen approaching towards his aim. Reese's shot was right on target in just one shot, which resulted in Marcus' car turning over a few moments later. Then Reese came to Marcus, who was dying, and took his cell phone to copy everything in it. Next, it shows Reese preparing to leave for Mexico to continue his search with his girlfriend named Riley. On the plane, Reese took the time to inform Ben about his next destination and then crossed out the name of the target he had killed. in another place, to be precise at the FBI headquarters, the team led by Agent Tony Leon was looking at footage of the shooting action carried out by Reese on the street few times ago. Tony realized that Reese was a very experienced person, as evidenced by his data which stated that Reese had been assigned 8 times in the combat area and received many awards, and this time, it was Tony who would handle the case. Tony immediately ordered his men to find out who was in the car with Reese when the incident occurred. The scene moves to Katie, who continues to investigate about Project RD-4895 and the companies associated with it, but suddenly, someone comes and tries to open the door of her house. And apparently after the door was successfully opened, it was seen that the people who came were Brian and his wife and his child. Brian is Katie's biological brother, and that house is their house which Katie happens to be traveling with to carry out an investigation. At the Capstone Company, a meeting is taking place between company leaders. Steve reports that the current situation is far from ideal because at the Pentagon there are cuts or reallocations in almost all sectors, and Elias, who plans to buy the new Bellum Company, delays his arrival because he thinks it's a risky investment since the death of Saul Agnon. Steve gave advice to New Bellum to be patient and continue the sales process. Mike, who was the head of New Bellum, said that his belief in Steve was starting to doubt over the death of Saul Agnon, who was the deputy director of Capstone with a needle stuck in his hand. Finally, Reese and Riley arrived in Mexico, and their arrival there was greeted by Marco and Paula, who were the hosts there. They continued with a lunch while telling stories about the past. Reese said that it had always been a beautiful place for him, and he remembered his past where his wife and his daughter were having fun in that place. At that night, Reese sent a message to Katie to ask about the progress of Project RD-4895, where Katie replied that she was sure that the other members of Reese also had the same tumor as Reese's. When he was sleeping, Reese felt a tremendous headache. Even his head still hurts until he wakes up. It makes him hallucinate again about his daughter, Lucy. Then Reese headed out where Ben was already there with Marco and Riley. Marco said that his men had managed to find the person who was believed to be Lauren and Lucy's killer. Meanwhile, at Katie's place, Agent Tony and some of his subordinates came there to file some questions, the questions about Reese. Katie said that it was impossible for Reese to kill his family and asked Tony to immediately talk to Saul Agnon and ask how Capstone Industries could give a platoon of Navy SEAL members a brain tumor. At that time, Katie did not know that Saul Agnon had died. Katie also admitted that at that time she did not know where Reese was. Before leaving, Tony leaves a business card in case Katie has news of Reese's position, and then shows Richard just arriving at his office, but Steve suddenly comes to intercept him to talk to him. Steve said that his entire business was being threatened by the new budget being proposed by the minister and Senator Pryor, who were among the decision makers, and because of that, Steve asked Richard to bring Pryor to him. Meanwhile in Mexico, Reese and his team began to strategize to carry out an attack on the person who had killed his family. Reese received information that the killer was named El Navajas, a person who worked for several cartels and an assassin who was currently one of his arms was injured. Reese initially wants to go for a head-on attack just with Ben, but Marco wants to tag along too, as this is his chance to eradicate all the evil. But while the meeting was still in progress, Reese's head began to hurt until he fainted. From the results of the examination, it was found that the tumor that was being suffered by Reese was growing rapidly. The doctor advised him to do a biopsy on a good surgeon who was in Mexico City with a healing period of 6 to 9 months. Because of his position at that time, Reese was going to carry out the attack. He only asked for medicine to deal with the symptoms of pain that often arise in his head. And because of the disease, Ben, Riley, and Marco returned to check whether Reese was still able to continue his mission or not. Considering that the disease that Reese is currently suffering from is very dangerous, Reese also ensures that he will continue to carry out his mission because El Navajas has taken everything that is valuable in his life. When Reese was preparing his weapon, Paula came to him and asked Reese not to come back again if he still survived in carrying out his mission, because for Paula, Reese could just take revenge for the death of his family, but shouldn't have to involve his friends in this trouble. The attack mission began to run in the middle of the rainy weather. One of El Navajas' men has been defeated. The team moves slowly into his base. Ben diverts communications to lure out the rest of El Navajas' men, and they were immediately killed when they entered the firing zone. The ambush continues to be carried out by continuing to defeat enemy troops. There was an exchange of fire at that location between Reese's team and El Navajas' team. Absolutely, Reese's team is superior in this battle, considering that they are all people who are very experienced in their fields. They also managed to rescue several child hostages held there. Shortly thereafter, El Navajas began to be seen with one of his hands still bandaged. Ben was shot, but luckily, he's fine. El Navajas didn't realize that Reese was behind him. He also got a shot from Reese. But he wasn't dead and Reese knocked him unconscious and then dragged him outside. And since this, El Navajas was the main perpetrator of the murder of his wife and his daughter, Reese took his revenge in a very painful way. Reese tore his stomach and removed the entrails of El Navajas, then hanged him. This is really cruel, guys. Finally, El Navajas died a moments later. Scene moved to another place. Katie apologizes to her brother for what happened in their house, but luckily, he doesn't mind too much. Not long after that, Katie got a call from her friend who gave her an information about the New Bellum pharmacy, saying that Steve Horn bought a controlling stake 6 years ago and turned the company into military nootropic, which is a major contract with the Department of Defense. Meanwhile, their medicines are distributed to 6 branches, and currently the company is going to be sold for $70 billion. Absolutely, that immediately made Katie anxious. Katie immediately packed her things and left the house. She didn't realize that Tony and his partner had been stalking her from the outside. Back to Reese, Ben gave him a file containing all the data he could get on Stephen Horn, and by that time, Reese was getting ready to fly with Riley to leave Mexico. Reese took the time to say goodbye to Marco and his family, and gave a weapon that was inherited from his father to Marco, as a thank you for helping him carry out the mission. Then the scene switches to the story in Najaf, Iraq, in 2007. At that time, Riley, who was still holding the rank of non-commissioned officer, asked Reese for help because her position was being cornered. Even though they couldn't get air support, Reese and his team still decided to come to save Riley. They immediately entered the war zone at that location. A few moments later, Reese found Riley, who looked tired and had a broken back due to the battle. There, Reese said that he would take Riley home, but a moment later, Lucy appeared there to ask if she would be okay. Reese woke up from his sleep. He had just had a dream that felt very real. It turned out that he was still on the plane with Riley. Immediately, Reese took medicine to withstand the pain and immediately got out of the plane. Then looking at the next target list, the scene moves to the Capstone Industries company, where Mike, who is the head of the New Bellum company, comes to meet Steve, who is the holder of power. Mike says that he will only sell RD-4895 research and all of its patents to Steve, but he will continue his company. But Steve still insisted on Mike that Capstone would still sell the New Bellum company as a whole. Mike was speechless about Steve's decision. Returning to Riley's headquarters, Reese said that he wanted to focus a direct attack on Capstone, which was immediately prevented by Riley because Capstone was right in the middle of the financial district, which was very crowded with people being there. Then the two of them went to that place to investigate what kind of attack might be carried out there. They saw the arrival of Tony and one of his members, namely Agent Mackenzie, who entered Steve's office. Tony came there intending to inquire about Gordo, who was one of Steve's supervisors who was killed by Reese a few times ago, but unfortunately, Steve said that at that time Gordo was not on duty, and maybe because he felt Steve's safety was threatened by Reese, Tony intended to join in too. Guard around the Steve's office to provide an extra security to him. Meanwhile, Katie also came to Mike's office in New Bellum to conduct an interview with him. At that time, Katie asked why, since Capstone appeared, Mike instead switched to nootropic military to maximize soldiers. Katie asked what was Mike's reason for doing this, but Mike didn't answer and instead chose to leave the room and go to the toilet. Katie followed him. Katie already knew that Mike was worried about Steve's actions towards his company. Then Katie asked, what does Project RD-4895 mean, and a little bit said that the project actually causes tumors in its users. Mike explained that RD-4895 had not reached human trials, but Katie denied it and said that the project has been tested on a Navy SEAL platoon that never returned from its mission, which left Mike speechless, because he didn't know what Katie meant. And before leaving, Katie wrote a piece of paper and gave it to Mike so that Mike could immediately contact her if he had time to talk later. Katie left where Tony's men had prepared to follow Katie from behind. On the other side, Reese continued to conduct reconnaissance near Steve's office, and after that, immediately discussed what he might do with Riley in their hangar. Reese's hands were tremor. It showed that he was not feeling well, but Reese still assured Riley that the mission will continue to run. Reese also tells Katie to back because he knew the FBI is following her, which makes Katie anxious. The scene moved to the meeting room in Steve's office, which was in the middle of negotiations to purchase the New Bellum company, which was attended by Mike, Steve, and Elias, potential buyers, and several other company officials. When Steve started asking for bid, Elias told everyone to get out from the room, including Mike. Mike seemed confused about the possibility of plans being carried out by Steve without his knowledge. Because of that, Mike immediately contacted Katie to tell her what he might know about Project RD-4895. Katie immediately invited Mike to meet but reminded Mike not to bring his smartphone so that not found out. A few moments later, Mike returned to Steve to apologize for causing trouble during the price negotiations, and after that, he asked permission to go home. Shortly thereafter, one of Steve's men came into the room to report that Mike had accessed an internal server to copy some data. possibly Mike would speak to the media. Elsewhere, Katie was getting ready to meet Mike, she carrying the weapon that Reese had given her for just in case. Steve came out of his office with a very tight escort, but something strange happened that night. That was where one of their convoys of vehicles took separate paths. Tony followed Steve's car while Reese followed another car that separated from the group. Katie invited Mike to meet at a train station. Mike explained that Project RD-4895 was deliberately designed to relieve post-battle trauma, but Steve stopped the project after conducting animal experiments. But after 2 months ago, Mike noticed deviations in the market capitalization table. There has been a discrepancy in the table detailing the shareholders in his company, but Katie is still confused as to what all this has to do with Navy SEAL who has been passed away. Meanwhile, Reese continued to follow the previous car until it stopped at a train station where Mike met Katie. Someone got out of the car and entered the station. Then Mike gave a flash disk to Katie and asked Katie to publish the news immediately if Project RD-4895 did give a tumor effect to the late of the Navy SEAL. All of this was done by Mike so that New Bellum's deal with Elias could be cancelled. But suddenly Katie realized someone was following her and immediately asked Mike to run away from that place. Of course it was Steve's men who were chasing them. That person managed to kill Mike, but Katie continued to run away to save herself. At the top of the stairs, Katie manages to kill that person. When leaving the room, there is one more person who intends to shoot Katie. Luckily, Reese came quickly to save her and immediately took Katie away. Katie was still in shock. When the car arrived at a hidden place, Reese gave her a drink to relieve her tension, and after that asked Katie for an explanation why did Steve chase her. Then Katie explained that RD-4895 was a drug created by the New Bellum company that aims to prevent trauma processing in the brain. The experiment was successful on rats and dogs, until Steve tried it on humans. More precisely on Reese and his troops, who finally gave them all a malignant brain tumor. If only the experiment was successful, then New Bellum would become the most valuable company in the world, and if it failed, then all of Steve's investment in the company would be meaningless. That's what made Steve decide to immediately sell the company to avoid losses that were more or less worth about $15 to $20 billion. Last month Steve took $100 million of his stock in the New Bellum company, then divided them into several shell companies. Reese concluded that the stock were a form of compensation for the killing of all his men who were killed in Syria. Because Katie did not want to give Reese a list of names, Reese finally took the flash disk that Mike just gave to Katie. Katie tried to prevent Reese because this was very big news, but Reese stood his ground and told Katie to get away from San Francisco immediately. Next, Reese contacted Ben, who was sound asleep, to provide the capitalization table data which contained all the shell companies in Steve's network that benefited from Project RD-4895. Then Reese sent the data so that Ben could access the reporter and find out the names of the people who owned the companies. Moved to another place, Richard, who had just arrived at his office. He was busy looking for something in his office. Suddenly the minister appeared carrying the item that Richard was looking for, namely a Cryptex cell phone. The minister introduces an agent from CIS named Agent Azad. Azad just found payments from Steve to an account in the name of Richard's mother for almost 2 years, which is very strange considering Richard's parents had been a long time ago passed away. The minister finally found out that Richard was playing with Steve, and now it's time for the minister to use Richard to avenge Steve's actions. A few moments later, Reese got a call again from Ben informing him that several of the company's owners had matched Reese's targets, namely Saul Adnan and Marcus Boykin, but Ben said that there were other names that would surprise Reese and change everything. The names turned out to be Admiral Pillar, Captain Howard and Commander Cox. They were all Reese's superiors in the Navy SEAL. This made Reese's grudge even more ferocious. Reese immediately told Riley to the shop to buy for some chemicals, because he was planning to make a bomb, but Riley forbids it, because the bomb explosion would most likely affect innocent civilians, but Reese said that there would be no other victims because of the EFP bomb is a very accurate bomb. After all the materials were procured, Reese and Riley set to work on a bomb. And after all was done, they immediately packed up and emptied the hangar to carry out the mission. As usual, Steve's convoy cars were right in front of his office. Reese asked Riley to keep an eye on the cars. On the other side, Tony and Mackenzie were also getting ready to be near the office to face the possibilities that would happen. Coincidentally, at that time there are a lot of members of the journalists because there will be an agreement between two big companies between Steve and Elias who will buy the New Bellum company. Katie, who is indeed a journalist, was also there. A few moments later, Steve came out of his building under super tight guard. Outside, he gave a statement on the death of his colleague over the past week. From a distance, Tony saw a suspicious car parked up to causing a traffic jam. Tony and Mackenzie immediately give chase there. In fact, it was Reese's plan to use Riley as a diversion. Reese began to walk slowly to align his car, which contained the bomb, with the convoy that Steve was about to enter. Reese immediately activated the bomb before Steve got into his car. However, there was a problem because Katie suddenly prevented Steve from getting into the car. Katie started to move away when she realized Reese was in front of her. Shortly thereafter, after Steve got into the car, Reese pressed the button for the bomb's detonation. Katie was also thrown by the effects of the explosion. The car was immediately destroyed with an explosion effect that directly hit Steve's car, but Steve was still alive even though he was seriously injured. Seeing this, Reese immediately took out his gun and hunted Steve directly. Reese easily could paralyze some of Steve's men. Finally, without hesitation, Reese shot Steve until died. Wasting no time, Reese quickly ran away from there. Then the scene shows Reese being chased by the FBI. The chase was immediately led by Tony and Mackenzie. Reese's car was hit by a mine set by the police and ended up crashing into a tree. Reese immediately packed his things so he could leave there immediately. When he saw Reese's gun, all the FBI troops immediately opened fire on his car. Tony and Mackenzie approached the car slowly, but didn't find Reese there. Only visible traces of blood and Reese's medicine bag were left behind. Reese continued to flee up the hill, his hand bleeding from having been hit by one of the shots. Then he went into a house to look for medicine that might be used for his hand. After closing the wound, Reese started to have a very bad headache. But he didn't find the medicine anywhere in his bag. Then he took some of the things he needed and also a map as directions. The scene moved on to Riley, who was calling Ben because he was worried about Reese's condition. Things were getting worse because there was going to be a rainstorm. Ben convinced Riley that rain and storms would be an advantage for Reese as it would make him even more difficult to find. Officers and sniffer dogs were deployed to find where Reese was. Reese decided to rest in a small cave around the hills while looking at pictures of his daughter. It can be seen on the paper that the target is still 3 more people who are none other than Reese. Reese remembers his past when he was still training with Commander Cox and also Ben, where Reese was always instilled with a sense of never giving up in any situation. The next day, help from the Navy troops was deliberately brought in to join in looking for Reese. Tony began to explain the field situation to the team, and one of them, named Smithy, said that it would not be that easy to deal with Reese, because he is a legend and a true patriot. Tony decides to join in the search for Reese with the help of the special team. Meanwhile, Reese continued his escape despite his weakened condition. Reese saw the helicopters above him and, looking for a way to distract them, one by one of the team descended to start the search. They followed the cellular signal coming from the cell phone in Reese's hand. The troops were completely unaware that Reese was right below them. One of them found a cell phone that had been deliberately placed under a tree trunk. Reese detonated a smoke bomb and moved fast. He threw multiple batteries to trick the heat signatures being monitored by officers. When they reached the top of the hill, Reese felt a headache again that made him hallucinate. But he tried to continue his escape. Tony tries to talk Reese into giving himself up. Reese continued up to the top of the hill. From there, he could see and aim at all the team members who were chasing him. He remembered his past when he was still as a sniper, but Reese didn't want to shoot them because the team was not his enemy. When the team got to the top, they found no one there. They only found a bullet indicating that Reese had a very good chance of shooting them all. It turned out that Reese was going down the hill slowly. Suddenly his hands shook, a sign that his illness had started to recur. Reese could not last long and finally fell to the ground. Fortunately, he was still able to survive. His condition looked increasingly tired, plus the wound on his arm was getting worse. Night came, coupled with the rainy conditions. Reese returned to rest on the hill while listening to the ongoing situation. Reese was annoyed that he did not have a supply of medicine. Then Reese opened a wound on his arm and heated the knife to stop the wound. It must have hurt a lot. That night, Reese had communicated with Tony. Tony tried to persuade Reese to end all of this because maybe someone would die if all this continued. But Reese said that he would not stop until he could take revenge on everyone who had hurt his family. The next morning, Reese continued his journey together with Tony's team, who continued their search. They managed to find Reese's resting place and then used a drone to help their search. On the hill, Reese dreamed again as if he was returning to his home. He returned to see the same incident and also his daughter. When he looked back, Reese saw a drone that immediately shot him. Reese's position was found out by the team that was looking for him. Not long after, Reese began to plant the bomb he had made and put it in the ground above the hill. His condition is indeed weak, but he still insists on continuing his mission. Mackenzie and the team who got there immediately told Reese to raise his hand, but Reese threatened them to back off immediately because he had held the trigger for the bomb in his hand. Reese told Mackenzie to direct the other team to hold his position, but Mac refused the order. When his position was surrounded, Reese pressed the trigger of the bomb, which made all the bombs explode immediately. The big explosion immediately created an avalanche that also rolled Mackenzie and Reese to the bottom of the hill. Reese still managed to survive the avalanche with a condition of breath that was gasping for breath. Reese saw a hand sticking out of the ground, which was Mackenzie, who was fainted because she was carried away by the avalanche. Reese tried to help her to wake up again. From a distance, Tony's voice was heard calling Mackenzie's name, and after a few moments of trying, Mackenzie finally woke up along with Tony and the other team coming to help her. Meanwhile, Reese had disappeared from there. In another place, Riley was seen listening to news about Reese's search. The news reported that Reese was thought to have died as a result of the explosion, which made Riley very sad. But unexpectedly, Reese suddenly appeared there in good condition. Then Riley treated Reese's wound and gave him medicine on the plane. Reese told Riley that he saw his wife and his daughter in the forest. Reese kept remembering the same thing over and over again. Riley said that Reese had to be able to accept the reality and let his family go, and he could forget these memories. Then a few moments later, Reese made a jump from the plane to continue his mission. Reese also arrived at a beach where Ben was waiting for his arrival. Then the scene shows night-day, where Reese decides to go home. He is reminded of his past when he first came to the house with his wife. He remembered every detail of that incident with a smile, until Reese realized that he was actually alone in the house. 15 hours earlier, a group of Navy troops were carrying out exercises on the beach. Inside the base, Admiral Pillar, Captain Howard, and Commander Cox were gathering to discuss the problems that have been raised by Reese. Howard was worried that this problem would also come to him and his family. For that, he suggested moving immediately. An argument ensued, but Pillar tried to calm him down and said that they still had many men to face Reese. Reese spied on the three of them through binoculars from the middle of the ocean. Ben said that the three of them had met every day since Reese managed to kill Steve Horn, then showed the minister who was on her plane while looking at a recording of the incident when Katie approached Steve to say that Steve was the person who killed Mike and also the person who caused the tumor to occur in the Navy SEAL troop. The minister looked quite surprised to witness this. When she arrived at the place of visit, the minister gave a speech where she told reporters that James Reese had now been declared a domestic terrorist. Meanwhile, at the FBI headquarters, Tony was also seen giving a kind of briefing to all of his men about their next plan to catch Reese. Tony explained that in order to catch Reese, they had to be able to find out in advance who the next target would be to be hunted by Reese. This was meant to make it easier for them to catch Reese. Katie also came there to ask for some kind of information. Katie asked Tony to access the data on Steve's computer to find out who the recipients of funds were related to Project RD-4895. Captain Howard, who had just arrived at his house, got a call from the head office, but he refused. He told his family that they would soon be moving to Miami. His wife and his child were quite shocked at the sudden news. Howard reasoned that they had to go on vacation temporarily until the situation normal again. Their conversation was overheard by Ben, who had tapped him from outside the house. Ben immediately told Reese that they had to move immediately because Howard would be leaving soon, and because this case was getting deeper, Reese had asked Ben about what the next plan was. Because the FBI would definitely continue to finding out, Ben explains that later he will go to a place called Mancora in Peru to retire. At that time, Reese was preparing all the equipment they would use to carry out the next mission. Returning to Tony's headquarters, from the results of Steve's computer examination, several correspondences were obtained with Admiral Pillar which mentioned the drug RD-4895, including the medics in Reese's army. The point is, Pillar already knows that they have a brain tumor. Pillar has also received payment for his role in the drug trial. Several companies called Global System Plus that received the payment were owned by Pillar. SXA Consulting was owned by Captain Howard. Contrabantics Inc. was owned by Commander Cox. The list also included other companies receiving payments which were owned by Marcus Boykin and also belongs to Saul Adnan. Then there is another company called Oberon Analytics whose owner is not yet known. From here, it can be concluded that James Reese has targeted the right people and was not mistaken. From the results of these data, Tony immediately divided his men to start spreading out the task. The scene moves to Captain Howard's house where his wife asks about what her husband is hiding. Howard just answers, Pillar is involved in a problem and he wants to avoid it for a while. Shortly thereafter, an FBI agent arrives there to meet Howard, only to discover it is Ben in disguise. Then a motorcade of FBI officers had just arrived at Pillar headquarters. They came there intending to check and find further data. Then Pillar gave a file to Tony because he already knew the purpose of Tony's arrival there. A few moments later, Tony got a call from Mackenzie who said that Howard was not found. They had booked tickets to Miami, but instead missed the flight. Commander Cox was also declared missing. In another place, to be precise at a bar, Cox was seen drinking to relieve the tension that was going on. Then not long after, he came out of the bar. When he was about to enter the car, Reese came over and without a second thought immediately he attacked him. A fight ensued in the approximate area, where Reese managed to beat Cox and knocked him out. When Cox woke up, he was suddenly on a beach with his hands tied while holding a large wooden block. Reese gave the same training that Cox had given him in the past, but the difference was that Cox had to lift the block alone. Cox admitted that Pillar was the one who gave permission, while Howard confirmed all the details of the experiment, and after Reese gave a few words, Cox was left to die carrying that heavy burden. On the side of the beach, Howard and his family were also bound and guarded by Ben. Howard tried to defend himself by saying that he was only following the job order. Reese asked Howard to help do something, but at first, Howard refused, but after Reese threatened to drown his wife and his child, Howard was forced to obey Reese's orders to do this. And before leaving, Reese asked Ben not to let Howard's wife and child go before the mission was successful. On the other side, Tony was called by his superiors when Agent Azad from DSIS came to his office. Tony's boss said that he was relieved of duty from the case he was currently handling and his entire team would be returned to their department. Tony tried to refute, because the FBI was investigating irregularities that were going on at the Pentagon. Tony thought that Pillar had carried out illegal experiments on his henchmen, but Agent Azad quickly refutes this and says that Pillar has the authorization to approve the experiment, so technically, the experiment is legal, but Azad believes that something is being covered up. Tony, who was feeling disappointed, then he came to Katie who had been waiting for him in the room. He said that the Pentagon was the one who authorized the RD-4895 experiment, then gave her a folder containing data about the owner of the company she was looking for so that Katie could solve it and news could immediately release it. Then Tony went to send home one of his agents who was staying at Reese's house and take his place there until the replacement team came. Katie didn't waste her time and immediately finished the news. Katie wrote in the news that the minister was the one who authorized the RD-4895 project. There, Katie thought that the name of the company that had not been revealed belonged to the minister with the money received a sum of $20 million. After the news was finished writing, Katie contacted Jordan to send the news so that it could be published immediately. After Jordan made sure to release the news within 1 hour, Katie immediately clicked the send button on her laptop. She felt relieved after sending the news, returned to Reese who was currently at his house. He hallucinated again where at that time he was at home with Laura who had just said that she was pregnant. Then after that, he fantasized about naming their child. Then Reese walked in an alley and he went back to his past during his last mission where he witnessed his comrades being shot. Then there were several other fantasies about his past that Reese experienced at his house in succession until he finally woke up because of the sound of his watch's alarm. Then he saw his cell phone containing a message from Katie saying that it was the minister who approved the RD-4895. Elsewhere, Howard came to his office alone to meet Admiral Pillar who was still there. Howard's face looked pale as he continued to look at the watch in his hand. Then he gave the cell phone to Pillar to talk directly to Reese. Reese said that he had set a trap for Pillar at the same time when Howard opened his jacket. It turned out that Howard's body had been attached to suicide. Pillar begged Reese not to do this, but Reese remained on his stance and pressed the button until there was an explosion that destroyed Admiral Pillar's room and its contents. Tony, who also heard the explosion from a distance, immediately asked if Reese was at his base, but his men replied that it was likely a bomb that was detonated remotely. Then Tony decided to check directly into Reese's house. Tony found Reese there until a fight broke out between the two of them. When he was pressed, Tony said that he already had evidence of Steve's crime and also Pillar, and Tony believed this could be solved together. But Reese still chose to fend for himself and hit Tony until he fell, then asked Tony to stay away from him. Meanwhile, Katie, who had been waiting for a long time, she contacted Jordan again to ask why until now the news had not been released, even though Katie had sent it an hour ago. But even Jordan hasn't received the news at all. Katie checked her email again and did not find the news she had sent. Realizing that something was wrong, Katie decided to leave immediately, but before she left, the minister's mother came and immediately said that she had just read the news that was sent by Katie now. It is possible that Katie's email had been tapped, but there the minister said that the news that Katie had just written was not entirely true, and the minister wanted Katie to interview her personally to find out the real truth. Then Reese and Ben, who were being reported on TV and had been declared terrorists, they were at a gas station where Ben changed his appearance slightly, so he wouldn't get caught. Ben gave an information that the minister had moved to an island because she knew Reese would come to her, and invited many guards from the Los Tactical for security. The minister's entourage and also Katie had just arrived on the island, where super tight security was being prepared. Katie also was brought there with the aim of having a direct interview with the minister. To straighten out the real news, the minister denied that she was not the owner of a previously untraceable doll company called Oberon Analytics. The minister also said that she had never received any payment from Steve Horn. The mother of minister admitted if she was the one who agreed to the experiment of Project RD 4895, but it was all done for a good cause, in order to reduce the suicide rate of veterans of war in the American Army. But here, the minister really does not know that the project actually caused tumors in the troops that were the target of the experiment. She also did not realize that the last mission carried out by Reese was a trap that was deliberately set up by Steve. For this reason, she ordered the CIS unit to investigate the mission in order to reveal who and what the intentions were from that mission. That's the real truth that Katie and maybe everyone does not knows. Elsewhere, Tony and Mac are seen discussing the latest developments regarding the minister and also Reese. At that time indeed Tony was suspended from his job, but he still wanted to handle the case and arrest everyone who was guilty. Tony told Mac that he'll be contacting someone so he can get back on the case since there might still be a chance at it. The minister also provided her personal account statement to prove that she had never received any payment from Steve. Seeing this, Katie immediately sent a message to Reese that she was with the minister and asked for a little time because maybe the news had an error. The message was not enough to change Reese's stance, who was on his way to the island with Ben. They both were shocked because far ahead of them there was a police raid. They immediately prepared to face the police no matter what. And when he arrived at the front, an officer asked Ben to show his driver's license, while another officer checked the inside of the car. At that time Ben had changed his name to Adam. He pretended to be heading to a place to surf. The officer checked the contents inside Ben's car carefully. While Reese was hiding under the bed box, Ben was getting ready to take his gun when the policeman started checking the bed. Luckily, Ben's inspection results were safe and they finally managed to escape the inspection. A few moments later, they arrived at the edge of a beach, where one of their friends named Rafe Hastings had sent a ship so they could cross. Rafe also provided a sniper rifle which will also be used for this final mission. On the other side, Tony and Mac are also getting ready to head to the island along with several other FBI troops who will accompany them. It was getting late, and the security system at the minister's residence continued to be improved. Katie also corrected her news based on the information she just got. Ben informed Reese that there were about 15 Lowe's troops standing guard outside the minister's house, and Ben told Reese that they could just withdraw from the mission and go to Peru to see the situation, but Reese remained in his stance to complete the mission so he could be calmed down. Reese felt at that moment he was with his team who had actually died and began to dive to carry out the final mission. That night, Katie returned for a final interview with the minister. Katie questioned why during the mission it was as if the minister had only allowed one platoon of Reese's troops to die. Even though the mission could have been cancelled before the death occurred, and during the mission, the minister was in the command room with Pillar, but instead of stopping the mission, the minister let it happen, which resulted in the death of Reese's entire army. Reese had arrived on the island and prepared his weapon, while Ben also prepared with his sniper from the top of the lighthouse tower. The first shot was fired by Ben, who instantly blew up a ship there. Tony and his team also saw the explosion from a distance. The minister and Katie were immediately secured by her bodyguards. Reese stepped forward and started shooting at the enemies one by one. Meanwhile, one of Tony's team saw someone shooting from the lighthouse tower. The battle continued until all the FBI teams arrived on the island. Ben, who was watching from a distance, asked Reese to immediately cancel the mission, but Reese decided to continue with his mission. Ben also saw a group of troops heading towards him and immediately decided to leave that place and leave Reese alone. Reese kept going and kept beating the guards, and finally he able to get into the house. Then Reese pulled out a smoke grenade, so he could be hard to see. The sound of gunshots was heard up to the room where the minister was secured. She immediately ordered two of her personal bodyguards to immediately come out to deal with Reese's arrival. Reese easily defeated the troops with his heat sensor rifle. Meanwhile, the minister was also prepared with a gun in her desk drawer. Reese had received a shot from one of the minister's personal bodyguards. One of them chose to give up and opened the door to the minister's office, but Reese continued to shoot him after that. Reese finally came in and immediately pointed his gun at the minister, but Katie tried to stop him by explaining that the minister was not the one who received the money from Steve, but that there was still one other actor on the agency's side. The minister also swore that she never meant to hurt Reese, but everything was meaningless because Reese knew that the minister was the one who let this all happen. Reese's condition also began to weaken as a result of the shot he got in the stomach. At that situation, Katie tried to persuade Reese again to not to shoot the minister because Katie had managed to get the real story and promised to make the minister regret later because of her mistakes. The minister, who heard that, looked shocked and very sorry. Meanwhile, outside, Tony divided the team to scatter in several directions while he walked alone. Reese still wanted to shoot the minister, but an unexpected decision was taken by the minister, that is by shot herself and die. Mackenzie's Tim had arrived in the room, but they found the minister who had died on her own desk and Katie sitting quietly. Meanwhile, Tony saw Reese walking out and immediately stopped him. But Reese only lowered his gun but kept walking and went back to get his diving gear. Reese was not afraid and told Tony that he was dead. Tony also received information from Mac saying that the minister had committed suicide. Mac also asked if Tony had seen Reese out there, but maybe Tony was aware that Reese was innocent. He said that he had not seen Reese's appearance and let Reese go missing. 3 weeks later, there was a total reform in the Pentagon. It was written in the news that the Pentagon had betrayed Reese's components. Katie continued to find out who actually owned the Oberon Analytics Company, which was one of the recipients of funds from Steve, which was still a question. Reese admitted that the story given by Katie and finally gave a good results. Katie gave an information that Oberon Analytics put their money in a bank in Peru. In another news, it was also mentioned that a search for James Reese was thought to have died. The scene then moved to another place, namely in Mancora, Peru. Ben had just finished surfing alone in the middle of the ocean. When he got into the boat, it turned out that Reese was already there waiting for him. Reese asked Ben about Oberon Analytics. Reese had no idea why Ben would do something like that, even though Ben was one of the people closest to him and the one Reese trusted the most. It turned out that Ben was the one who designed Reese's last mission, which killed all his troops. Ben acknowledged all of his actions, but he did not know that Reese's wife and his daughter would also be killed. Because of that, Ben helped Reese from the start to slaughter the killers of his family. Finally, Ben apologized to his friend and asked Reese to complete his last of the list. And from a distance came the gunshots that ended Ben's life forever and completed the mission of a Commander James Reese to avenge his family and all his friends. Flashes of the past are shown again when a bird crashes into their house, where Reese says that the bird will not survive. Reese explains to his daughter, Lucy, that if one day he does not come home from work, Lucy must know that her father has died because of something important, and Reese promised to always keep an eye on Lucy even from another place. Then Reese looked back at the target list where everything had been successfully completed, and he also saw a picture of his daughter for the last time before throwing it into the sea. Reese decides to go to a place in Nyasa where he will disappear forever, and the movie ends.